So I want you to just take a second and really picture your typical workplace or, even your local neighborhood association.
Oh, the sheer amount of structure in those places is wild.
Right. It's just massive. You've got the boss, the middle
The
managers.
inevitable office politics.
Exactly. And the annual performance reviews. It is just this completely constructed, really rigid environment where someone is always holding the clipboard, right? And someone else is always being managed.
Yeah, that's exactly how we're conditioned to operate.
But now I want you to imagine taking all of that, the rule books, the concept of a boss, the titles, and even the fundamental idea of owning your own private desk or piece of property and just throwing it completely out the window. How could a society like that possibly function? Wouldn't a community with zero management instantly collapse into, I don't know, a chaotic free-for-all?
Well, I mean, it's totally logical to assume a complete collapse. We are deeply conditioned from birth to believe that, societal structure absolutely requires top-down authority to maintain any sort of order.
Right, you need someone in charge.
Exactly. But the source material we're examining today argues the exact opposite of that assumption. We are looking at a really radical, highly detailed blueprint for human society called the second home, which is now known in its practical application as New Oasis for Life.
Yeah, and this was authored by a Scubbing, right?
Yes, and this document outlines a completely different way for humanity to exist. It's fascinating.
And the core mission of our deep dive today is to really understand the mechanics of this blueprint. Because it doesn't just suggest a few minor policy tweaks. It takes the ancient philosophy of Lao Tzu, Taoism, and actively applies it to create a modern living model for future mankind.
Which is a huge undertaking.
It really is. And the text leans heavily on a concept it calls holographic thinking, which it also refers to as paradise management. So, okay, let's unpack this. Because before we get into the daily rules of this utopia, we really need to understand that terminology. Holographic thinking sounds like a concept straight out of a science fiction novel.
It really does sound sci-fi.
Yeah. And reading through these instructions, they feel entirely paradoxical at first glance.
Well, defining that term is the perfect place to start because it's essentially the lens through which this entire society operates. So think of a physical hologram.
Okay.
If you shatter a holographic plate, you don't get puzzle pieces of the image. Every single tiny shard still contains the entire complete image.
Wow.
Right. So in the context of the second home, holographic thinking means that every individual's daily microscopic actions naturally contain, reflect, and sustain the macro harmony of the whole society. You just don't need a government forcing people to align with a grand vision because the whole vision is already embedded in their smallest daily routines.
So it's like the individual and the society are functioning like a fractal. The small pattern perfectly mirrors the large pattern.
Precisely. Which brings us to the foundational philosophy making that even possible. The entire premise of the second home rests on conforming to the Tao, so the natural way of the universe, and complying with the greatest creator. The overarching goal is to cultivate an environment where natural human virtues, things like sincerity, kindness, beauty, peace, and trust, they just naturally bloom on their own.
And the paradox of this paradise management is that the only way to get those virtues to bloom is by completely, utterly removing artificial human meddling.
Yes, exactly.
No arbitrary regulations, no complex legal codes, no moral commandments. The text basically argues that the moment you attempt to aggressively manage people using, human intelligence and forced hierarchies, you disrupt the natural order and create the very chaos you're trying to prevent.
It's a total paradigm shift. And if the goal is to let these virtues bloom organically, then we really have to look at the engine of this society, which requires a systemic dismantling of traditional leadership.
Which the text is unapologetically explicit about. In the second home, there are absolutely no managers, and consequently there is no one who is managed.
None at all.
It states that the distinction between people is strictly a division of labor. So everyone provides a service to the community, but there are zero differences in status. Instead of appointing bosses, the text introduces this concept of invisible saints.
And that invisible saints concept is a direct practical application of Lao Tzu's thought. These individuals do not lead by standing on a stage and preaching. nor do they send out memos or give orders.
So how do they lead?
They lead entirely by wordless example. They create, they serve, they take on the heavy lifting for the community, but they claim absolutely no credit or elevated status for their contributions. They essentially manage the affairs of the community through the absence of action.
Okay, I think to step in here with a practical challenge, because when I read absence of action and no designated managers, my mind instantly goes to the dreaded school group project.
Oh, the absolute worst.
Right. We have all experienced this dynamic. You get put in a group, the teacher refuses to assign a leader, everyone's supposed to just naturally collaborate, and what happens? Absolutely nothing gets done.
Or one person does everything.
Exactly. One highly anxious person ends up doing the entire project while quietly resenting everyone else, and the whole dynamic is just toxic. So if there are no managers delegating tasks and no one claiming credit for the work, doesn't this community just become a disorganized mess where, like, the trash never gets taken out?
It's a totally fair question.
I would hypothesize that a system like this would have to rely on immense, crushing peer pressure to function.
Well, what's fascinating here is how the text anticipates the exact group project dilemma you just described, and it actually solves it without resorting to peer pressure at all.
Really? How?
So the text insists on this concept of absence of action, which is often known as Wu Wei in Taoism, but it pairs that philosophical surrender with hyper-specific, inescapable accountability. The blueprint mandates that all affairs, no matter how monumental or mundane, must have a crystal-clear division of labor. One specific person is assigned absolute responsibility for that specific affair.
Wait, that feels like a contradiction. We just said there's an absence of action and no managers, but now someone is absolutely responsible.
I know it sounds contradictory, but it's domain responsibility without hierarchical authority.
Yeah.
You don't need a boss looking over your shoulder, and you don't need a manager assigning you a daily checklist because your specific designated role within the community is already known to you and everyone else. You are the sole person responsible for the success of your domain. You function as a mutual service provider, not an employee.
Right, which completely changes the psychological motivation for getting out of bed in the morning. You aren't, sweeping the floors or harvesting the crops to climb a corporate ladder or to win Employee of the Month.
Or to avoid being yelled at by a supervisor.
Exactly. You are doing it because it is your designated way of serving the community, just as the person baking the bread and the person maintaining the solar panels are serving you in their respective roles.
It's deeply reciprocal.
It is. It removes the vertical status, but keeps the horizontal function. It turns the traditional corporate pyramid into a perfectly flat circle.
And that flat circle requires a massive shift in how we understand value. Because when you establish a society of mutual service rather than tiered authority, you immediately run into one of the most stubborn aspects of human psychology.
Which is?
People are hardwired to seek status. If there are no official bosses to compete with, individuals will inevitably try to invent a new ladder to climb. They'll start hoarding resources or showing off their intelligence just to elevate themselves above their neighbors.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this leads to the text's incredibly radical deconstruction of value. To stop people from fighting over status, the blueprint argues that you have to entirely eliminate the things people naturally fight over.
Which is a huge leap.
It's massive. The text mandates several societal rules pulled straight from Lao Tzu. It commands the community to exalt not the wise and prize not rare objects. It explicitly states that the rarer a thing is, the less it should be utilized. It goes so far as to demand that we banish wisdom, discard knowledge, and perhaps, most shockingly, banish humanity and discard justice. And I immediately rejected this concept when I first read it.
It's a very jarring thing to read.
So jarring, because in our modern world, we consider justice and wisdom to be the absolute foundational pillars of a civilized society. Like, we build entire economic systems around exalting the wise, awarding them advanced degrees, giving them massive salaries, putting them on television.
We constantly praise cleverness.
We do. And we create sprawling, intricate legal systems to enforce our concept of justice. So why on earth would a utopian text instruct us to throw all of those noble concepts into the trash? My initial thought was that a society without a strict enforcement of justice would instantly be overrun by bad actors and criminals.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the psychology behind discarding those concepts is profoundly observant of human flaws. Think about the direct consequences of creating a system that heavily rewards wisdom or cleverness. By flaunting talent or constantly praising how clever a particular individual is, you accidentally create a lucrative market for cunning behavior.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right.
Okay.
You incentivize people to be deceptive, to cut corners, and to manipulate the system so they can appear to be the smartest or the most talented and claim the associated rewards.
So by building the pedestal, you are actively manufacturing the scammers who will try to cheat their way to the top of it.
Exactly. And that same dynamic infects how a society approaches morality. The Taoist perspective embedded in the second home argues that by creating rigid, punitive laws and loudly, publicly preaching about morality and justice, a society is essentially confessing that it is inherently immoral.
That makes a lot of sense.
If people were naturally operating in a state of goodness, you just wouldn't need a booming industry of lawyers, judges, and moral philosophers constantly preaching about what justice is. Furthermore, if a society prizes rare objects, whether that's diamonds, luxury vehicles, or, corner offices with a view, it immediately ignites human desire, jealousy, and competition.
Right. Where there is manufactured desire, there is inevitable conflict. I mean, if everyone is content wearing simple clothes, there is peace. The moment you introduce a crown, everyone wants to be the king, and the peace is destroyed.
That's a perfect way to put it. The blueprint demands that the community eschew excess, extravagance, and pride. You must shut out the objects of desire. If you completely remove the rare objects from circulation and you stop turning intellectual capability and righteousness into a competitive sport, you essentially starve human desire.
Wow.
Without that desire for elevation, those cunning ones we discussed have no loopholes to exploit. There's no market for their deceit. And this culminates in the ultimate goal of the second home, the complete elimination of private ownership.
Which is such a difficult concept for us to grasp today.
It is.
Yeah.
The text uses a striking phrase to describe this state, stating that the inhabitants have nothing but actually possess everything.
Have nothing but actually possess everything. That is a heavy concept to digest. Kind of reminds me of the national park system, actually.
Oh yeah, how so?
Well, if an individual citizen tries to claim a square foot of Yellowstone National Park and put a fence around it, they have gained a tiny patch of dirt, but they have conceptually lost the park.
Right.
Because nobody privately owns the park, every single citizen actually possesses the ability to enjoy the entire vast wilderness. By refusing to desperately cling to your tiny, privately owned slice of the pie, you are granted access to the whole bakery.
That's a brilliant analogy.
But let's ground this high-level philosophy into daily reality. Because if we have successfully thrown out traditional ambition, eliminated material wealth, abolished private property, and we aren't even allowed to preach about morality, what does a standard Tuesday actually look like in this community?
Right, how does it actually function?
Exactly. How do these people physically operate without descending into total lethargy?
Well, the text provides very clear practical ground rules for managing this ruleless reality. First, regarding daily labor, individuals engage in work that directly aligns with their specific hobbies, personalities, and inherent talents.
That sounds ideal.
It really does. You aren't forced into labor that breaks your spirit or misaligns with your physical capabilities. You contribute in a way that just matches your nature. Secondly, the entire operation of the community relies on absolute transparency. The text dictates that all affairs and arrangements must be made completely public so that everyone has clear knowledge of them.
That transparency requirement is vital.
Yeah.
I mean, secrecy is the fertile soil where power imbalances grow. If you cannot hold a closed-door meeting and you cannot hide a ledger, you physically cannot form a secret hierarchy or some shadow management team.
Exactly.
The flat circle remains flat because everyone can see everything.
It serves as an automatic leveling mechanism. And alongside transparency, the text introduces what seems like a contradiction to its earlier rules. Despite demanding that we discard human wisdom in the competitive sense, the blueprint insists that the community must seek truth from facts.
Oh, right, the science part.
Yes. They must rely heavily on science, logic, and spiritual perception, and absolutely aggressively avoid superstition.
That apparent contradiction really fascinated me during my research, because it says banish knowledge in one paragraph, but stick to facts, science, and logic in the next.
It feels confusing at first.
It does. But it feels like the text is making a crucial distinction regarding the purpose of information. Like it's instructing the community to use science and facts to practically understand the physical world, how to grow food, how to generate power, but to never use that scientific knowledge to build a hierarchy where, say, the smartest engineer gets to rule over the laborer.
Precisely. It's about utility, not status.
But the aggressive ban on superstition is what really caught my eye, because Taoism is a deeply spiritual philosophy, yet this blueprint is terrified of superstition. And I would hypothesize that superstition is dangerous to this society because of how it creates authority.
Expand on that a bit.
Well, think about the mechanics of superstition. It inherently requires someone to possess secret, unverified knowledge. A shaman, an oracle, a guru. The moment someone claims to uniquely speak for the spirits, they elevate themselves above the rest of the community.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
Right. Whereas science is completely democratic. A chemical reaction works the exact same way for the invisible saint as it does for the newest member of the community.
That is a brilliant synthesis of the text's intent. Science is verifiable and shared, whereas superstition relies on hidden authority, which directly violates that core tenet of transparency we just talked about.
Exactly.
Another absolute pillar governing daily life is strict nonviolence. The text outright forbids the manufacturing or possession of any weapons, swords, spears, rods that are specifically meant to harm others. However, the rule extends far beyond physical weapons.
Into interpersonal dynamics, right?
Yes, it dictates absolute nonviolence in human interaction. There can be no physical force, no psychological coercion, no suppression, and absolutely no imposing of one's will onto another person.
So, looking at all these elements operating together, the unhindered freedom to pursue work that matches your hobbies, the absolute transparency, the total ban on coercion, but also this underlying foundational requirement to, as the text says, embrace the one, revere the greatest creator, and abide by the overall arrangement of the only government in the whole world.
It's a very specific balance.
It is, and honestly, it bears a striking resemblance to playing a massive open-world video game.
Okay, the mechanics of video game design apply well here. How does that analogy map onto the second home?
Well, in a well-designed open-world game, the player experiences total freedom. You can walk in any direction, you can pick up any profession, blacksmith, explorer, merchant, and you can interact with anyone. You're completely unmanaged by the game developers.
Sure.
However, you are only able to enjoy that boundless freedom because you are operating within a very strict, invisible core physics engine that is running the reality of the game. Like, you cannot simply decide to walk through a solid brick wall,
Yeah.
and you cannot turn off gravity just because you feel like it.
Ah, I see.
So in the second home, the day-to-day freedom of the inhabitants is the open world. But embracing the one, following the way of nature, and complying with the greatest creator, that is the inescapable physics engine. You possess total, unmanaged freedom as long as you never attempt to break the core engine that is generating the reality you live in.
This raises an important question regarding human history. How does this blueprint successfully balance that ultimate unmanaged individual freedom with such absolute overarching collective unity?
Because we usually fail at that.
We do. Historically, human societies tend to swing wildly like a pendulum between extreme individualism, which degrades into selfishness and isolation, and extreme collective unity, which almost always solidifies into tyranny.
Right.
The text provides a very clear philosophical answer for how the second home anchors this balance, and it's simply moderation.
The blueprint specifically instructs the community to practice moderation in everything. Do not overdo.
Eschewing the extreme is the secret to maintaining the balance. The blueprint asks its people to keep their environment clean and tidy, to live intentionally unsophisticated and honest lives, and above all, to never disrupt their neighbor's peace and quiet.
Just live simply.
Exactly. When individuals are allowed to simply enjoy an ordinary existence, when the intense, crushing societal pressure to be exceptionally clever or uniquely special or fabulously wealthy is entirely lifted off their shoulders, harmony is no longer something that a government has to force at the end of a spear.
It just happens.
Right. Harmony simply becomes the natural, inevitable byproduct of a moderated environment.
I love how it reframes the concept of being ordinary into a beautiful achievement rather than a personal failure. Like, in our current heavily managed world, if you are just ordinary, society implies that you aren't hustling hard enough or you lack ambition.
You're falling behind.
Yes. But in the second home, being ordinary, peaceful, and balanced is the ultimate metric of success. So what does this all mean for us? When we step back and look at this entire radical blueprint, from the bossless work environments and the specific ban on rare objects to the absolute reliance on nature's way over human intellect, what is the final practical takeaway of this paradise management?
The final takeaway is a profound paradox, beautifully summarized by the author at the very conclusion of the text. Paradise management, or holographic thinking, is simultaneously simple and complicated.
Okay.
The text notes that it requires supreme wisdom and deep philosophical reflection to truly understand the mechanics of it. However, if an individual simply surrenders to the way of nature and aligns their life with the way of the greatest creator, the actual physical execution of it becomes incredibly simple.
It's only hard if you fight it.
Exactly. The system only devolves into a chaotic, complex mess if humans resist the natural flow and attempt to manage society using human cleverness, endless rulebooks, and artificial hierarchies.
It's basically the difference between trying to control a river and letting a river flow. Like if you decide you want to aggressively manage a river, you have to build massive concrete dams, install intricate spillways, constantly monitor pressure levels, and employ a whole team of stressed engineers just to make sure the water goes exactly where you dictate.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
It is. It's an exhausting, incredibly fragile system, and if one valve breaks, the whole valley floods. But if you simply let the river flow along its natural, ancient topography, it manages itself. It waters the valley automatically, without a single meeting or memo.
The complexity of modern life is largely generated by our stubborn insistence on control. The simplicity offered by the second home comes from a complete surrender to the natural order.
So I want you, listening right now, to take a second and truly reflect on your own daily life. Think about your routine from the moment you wake up. How much of your daily stress, your chronic anxiety, and your mental exhaustion comes directly from overcomplicating your life with arbitrary rules?
A lot, I'd imagine.
Probably most of it. How much of your finite energy is spent battling other people over rare objects, whether that is a literal luxury item, a promotion at work, or just perceived social status among your peers? How much pressure do you feel every single day to prove to everyone around you just how clever, capable, and important you are?
Operating under that constant pressure is an exhausting way to exist, and it is the exact psychological exhaustion that this utopian blueprint seeks to cure. By entirely dismantling the artificial structures that demand we constantly prove our worth, the second home offers a radical, deeply challenging reimagining of what a successful human life actually looks like.
It really challenges everything we take for granted. And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over on your own today, something that builds directly on the implications of this text. The author makes the incredible argument that loudly preaching righteousness and publicly praising wisdom actually creates a lucrative market for hypocrisy and cunning behavior.
Which is such a counterintuitive thought.
But apply that ancient Taoist logic to our hyper-modern world today. Think about the architecture of social media. We live in an era where performing morality, publicly showcasing our virtues, and showing off our intelligence is literally the main currency of our society.
It's exactly how we acquire likes, followers, and cultural influence.
Exactly. So what if the blueprint is entirely correct? What if, by constantly loudly broadcasting our virtues to the world, we are actually fueling a pervasive culture of deceit, comparison, and severe anxiety?
It's entirely possible.
If we completely stopped broadcasting our goodness, if we intentionally discarded public righteousness, just as the text suggests, and simply lived quietly, would our local communities and our own minds actually become more genuinely peaceful?
It's a heavy concept to chew on the next time you find yourself tangled up in the invisible, exhausting rules of your workplace, or stressing out over a societal system that insists on managing your every move.
Maybe the answer to our stress isn't finding a better management strategy. Maybe the answer is no management at all. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We thoroughly enjoyed exploring the mechanics of this radical blueprint with you. We are wishing you a wonderful, peaceful, and entirely unmanaged day.